Imagine standing on a battlefield where two of history's greatest warrior traditions collide. On one side, bronze gleams beneath the Mediterranean sun, shields locked together in unbreakable formation. Echoes through the dust the Spartans, sons of Sparta, bred from birth to know nothing but war. On the other side, the sharp metallic whisper of a katana being unsheathed cuts through the air, and standing in disciplined silence are the samurai, warriors of feudal Japan. They are honor-bound by the ancient code of Bushido. Now ask yourself this: if the Spartan phalanx and the samurai ranks were to clash, who would truly dominate the battlefield? This is not just a clash of men, it is a clash of worlds, of philosophy, of identity itself. And the answer may not be as simple as strength versus skill. To understand this question, we must look deeper not only into weapons and armor, but into the mindset, the training, the culture that forged each of these warriors. Because in war, steel alone never decides the outcome, human spirit does. The Spartans were not ordinary soldiers. They were raised in the agoge, a brutal system that stripped boys from their families at the age of 7 and turned them into instruments of war, hunger. Pain, humiliation, all were tools to mold them. They were taught to endure everything, to fear nothing, to see death not as tragedy but as duty. For a Spartan, the battlefield was home and retreat was unthinkable. It is said that Spartan mothers told their sons, "Come back with your shield or on it," a chilling reminder that survival without honor was worse than death. Compare this to the samurai of Japan. They were not merely fighters, they were guardians of a code. Bushido demanded loyalty, discipline, and above all, honor. To fail in duty was a shame so unbearable that many chose seppuku, ritual suicide, rather than live with disgrace, where the Spartans lived for the collective. The samurai lived for a balance between loyalty to their lord and personal virtue. Their armor was lighter, their weapons more refined, but their philosophy was no less fierce. Each samurai trained for years with the bow, the spear, and, of course, the katana, a weapon so sharp and so revered that it became a symbol of their very soul. So, when you picture Spartans and samurai meeting face to face, you are not simply imagining two armies, you are imagining the raw, unyielding strength of discipline versus the precision and elegance of mastery. One side chanting as a wall of bronze, the other side silent but deadly, each man an individual blade honed to perfection. But here's the real twist: battlefields are never decided on paper. Weapons do not fight alone, men do. And men are guided by culture, by training, by belief. The Spartan phalanx was nearly invincible when it held together. Shoulder to shoulder, spear tips bristling, shields overlapping. It was like a moving fortress. Yet, it demanded unity. If one man broke, the formation cracked. The samurai, by contrast, emphasized individual combat prowess in duels, in skirmishes, in chaotic clashes. They thrived. So ask yourself, in a battlefield without rules, would the rigid wall of the Spartans crush the samurai? Or would the samurai's adaptability cut through those cracks, exploiting every weakness? This is the mystery of history, the what-ifs that we cannot test, but can only imagine, and in imagining, we learn not only about them, but about ourselves, because when we debate Spartans versus samurai, we are really asking, what do we value more in yielding unity or individual mastery, raw power or refined skill? This is where the story begins, and as we unravel it, you may find your answer shifting with every detail. Because history is never as simple as two sides, it is a web of choices, strengths, flaws, and human truths. Now, let's go deeper into their training, their weapons, and the kind of wars they were built to fight. Only then can we even begin to imagine who would truly walk away victorious. Picture the Spartan warrior standing on the battlefield. His weapon of choice is the dory, a long spear of nearly 7 to 9 feet, tipped with iron. This was not a weapon for flashy duels, it was designed for formation fighting, where every man's spear became an extension of the phalanx wall. Behind the dory was the xiphos, a short sword used when the spear broke or the battle closed to grappling range, and, of course, the aspis, the great round shield weighing over 15 pounds. A massive disc of wood and bronze, this shield was more than protection. It was the glue of the phalanx. It covered not only its bearer, but the man beside him. That meant a Spartan did not just fight for himself, his shield was his brother's lifeline. Break the line, and the wall collapsed. This interdependence forged Spartans into something more than individuals. They became a singular machine of war greater than the sum of its parts. Now, imagine the samurai stepping forward. His primary weapon, the katana, gleams in the light. Sharp, curved, perfectly balanced, it was as much an art form as a tool of war. But contrary to popular imagination, the samurai did not rely only on the katana. In fact, on the battlefield, they were more likely to wield the yumi, a longbow of remarkable power, capable of striking down an enemy at distances far beyond the reach of a Spartan spear. Later samurai also became skilled with the yari, the spear, which could hold enemies at bay or thrust with deadly precision. Their armor, lamellar in design, was lighter than the bronze cuirasses of the Spartans, while a Spartan carried the weight of heavy bronze on chest, shoulders, and head. A samurai wore armor of lacquered plates bound with silk cords flexible, allowing speed and movement. One was built for holding the line, the other for adapting and maneuvering. So, which has the edge? That depends entirely on the terrain and the rules of engagement. Place them on the narrow pass of Thermopylae, and the Spartans would be almost unstoppable. Their phalanx would grind forward like an unyielding tide, each step coordinated, each shield interlocked. No samurai could break through that wall without extraordinary numbers. But place them in open fields, forests, or uneven ground territory, the samurai knew well, and suddenly the advantage changes. The samurai, with their bows, would rain arrows from a distance. Their lighter armor would let them dart in and out, slicing at flanks, exploiting weaknesses. They did not need to break the wall head-on. They could bleed it slowly, death by 1,000 cuts. And yet, let us not underestimate the psychological side of this battle. Spartans thrived on intimidation. Their reputation alone often shattered the morale of their enemies, two-faced men who feared nothing. Who would rather die than surrender? Could unravel even seasoned troops, but the samurai carried their own aura of fear. The sight of their precision strikes, their calmness in the face of death, their ritualistic devotion to Bushido, it was as though they were not fighting for life at all, but for a higher ideal. And here lies the question: when two forces that glorify death meet, who falters first? Perhaps the most revealing difference lies in their sense of identity. Spartans existed only as part of Sparta. They were not individuals, they were fragments of a single body. The samurai, though bound to lords, carried within themselves a personal code, a sense of the self that survived beyond the army in a duel. The samurai was unmatched in formation. The Spartan was unbreakable, and in war. Both elements matter: duel and formation, self and collective. History shows us this contrast again and again. When the Persians faced the Spartans at Thermopylae, vast numbers could not crack the phalanx. When rival clans clashed in Japan, samurai leaders shaped the tide not just through massed ranks, but through decisive duels, assassinations, and individual acts of valor. War is never one-dimensional. It bends to environment, to leadership, to timing. So, what would happen if these two worlds collided? Would the Spartan shield wall withstand the storm of arrows? Would the samurai adapt faster than the rigid phalanx? Or would something else decide it altogether, the unseen factors of hunger, terrain, weather, morale? The longer you look, the less the answer is about weapons at all, and the more it becomes about psychology, culture, and resilience. Because the truth is, neither Spartans nor samurai were designed to fight each other. They were designed to fight their own wars, their own enemies, their own worlds. But in this what if, we strip them of that context and force them into a fantasy duel. And when you strip away history, what remains is pure imagination, and imagination often reveals more about us than about them. As you weigh the possibilities, ask yourself, would you rather stand in the shield wall, trusting your brothers never to falter? Or would you rather stand with your blade, trusting your own skill to carve your fate? Which side would you choose? Think for a moment not just about warriors, but about the minds that guided them. For For the Spartans, leadership was forged in a culture where every citizen was expected to sacrifice for the state. Their kings, though technically monarchs, often fought in the front lines alongside their men. Leonidas at Thermopylae is the most famous example of a king who chose to die with his soldiers rather than abandon them. This set a precedent of shared destiny, where leaders were not distant commanders, but flesh and blood within the phalanx. The result? Absolute trust. When a Spartan leader gave an order, it was obeyed without hesitation, because that leader had already proven he would face death with his men. Contrast this with the samurai structure. Samurai followed their daimyo, feudal lords who commanded loyalty above all. Unlike Spartan kings, who led from the battlefield, daimyo often orchestrated from behind, managing broader campaigns while samurai fought in their name. Yet the samurai ethos, Bushido, demanded an almost fanatical loyalty. Betraying one's lord was the ultimate shame, and seppuku was considered a better end than dishonor. So, while Spartan leadership was rooted in shared experience, samurai leadership was rooted in absolute obedience. Both produced fierce discipline, but in very different ways. Which style is stronger in battle? The Spartan model created unity through mutual sacrifice. Soldiers believed their leaders were as vulnerable as they were. The samurai model created unity through hierarchy. Soldiers believed their leaders embodied their honor and future. Two systems, equally effective in their own time, but how would they fare against each other? Imagine a battlefield stalemate, Spartans holding formation, samurai testing angles. Morale begins to strain. The Spartans are taught never to retreat, never to surrender. They will hold the line until death. The samurai, while equally unafraid of death, also carry a sense of adaptability. If victory demands retreat and regrouping, they can accept it without shame as long as the strategy serves their lord. Here lies a subtle but critical difference. Spartans viewed flexibility as weakness. Samurai viewed flexibility as strategy in a long battle. Would Spartan rigidity become their strength or their downfall? Now, let's talk about psychological warfare. Spartans often relied on terror before the fight even began. Their sheer presence rows of bronze, chants echoing, spears raised was enough to frighten less disciplined foes. Enemies sometimes broke before the clash even started. But samurai had their own form of terror, and it was quieter, colder, the calm precision of a samurai duel. The sharp slash of a katana ending a life in one motion could rattle an opponent's courage. To see an enemy so unflinching in death, so graceful in killing, created a dread of a different kind. It wasn't brute intimidation, it was the fear of facing someone who looked like death itself. Yet wars are not won by fear alone. They are won by endurance, logistics, the ability to outlast the other side, and here the Spartans face a challenge. Their entire society was built for war, but also limited by it. Spartans were few in number, and their economy relied heavily on the labor of Helots enslaved people who farmed the land while warriors reigned. If a war dragged on too long, Spartan resources strained. Samurai, by contrast, lived within a broader Japanese society that could sustain larger numbers over longer campaigns. Though individual samurai were elite, they were supported by armies of Ashgar foot soldiers who could bolster their numbers and expand their endurance. So ask yourself this, in a battle not of ours, but of days, who survives the wall of Spartans? Unbreakable in short bursts, might crumble if stretched too thin. The samurai, less rigid but more sustainable, might grind them down through time and patience. But let us not rush to conclusions, because history is full of surprises. Armies that should have won often lost. Strengths that seemed decisive sometimes became weaknesses. Alexander defeated Persia despite being outnumbered. The Mongols toppled entire empires through mobility alone. So why should Spartans versus samurai be any different? Perhaps the real key lies not in who was stronger, but in who adapted faster to the unexpected. For what is war if not chaos? And here is the ultimate question for you, the listener. Do you believe strength lies in never breaking or in bending when necessary, only to strike harder later? Do you side with the Spartan idea of collective sacrifice or the samurai idea of personal honor within a larger strategy? Neither answer is wrong, But your choice may reveal what you value most, not just in warriors, but in life. And perhaps that's why we keep asking these what-ifs, because in debating Spartans versus samurai, we aren't only imagining history, we're debating ourselves. Step away from the battlefield for a moment and look at the daily lives that created these warriors. For Spartans, life itself was a preparation for war from birth. Infants were inspected, those deemed too weak or sickly were abandoned. Left to die on the slopes of Mount Taygetus, survival began with brutality. Boys were taken from their families at the age of 7, thrown into the agoge, a system designed to break them down and rebuild them as soldiers. They were starved to teach them cunning, beaten to teach them endurance, and tested in constant combat to sharpen their instincts. To be a Spartan was not a choice, it was destiny, enforced by society at every stage. There was no escape, no alternative path. You lived as a soldier, or you died. Samurai upbringing could not have been more different, yet it produced an equally fearsome result. Born into the warrior class, samurai children were trained in martial arts, horsemanship, and archery from an early age. But they were also educated in literature, philosophy, and even poetry. A samurai was expected to be not only a warrior, but also a man of culture. To wield the sword was not enough, you had to wield the mind as well. This duality created a different kind of strength, one that combined physical mastery with intellectual depth. Imagine the difference in worldview this created. The Spartan saw the world through the lens of collective survival. Every action serving the phalanx, every sacrifice made for Sparta. The samurai saw the world through Bushido, where loyalty, honor, and self-discipline guided the path, and when dishonor came, the samurai would rather end his life in ritual seppuku than live in shame. Spartans did not choose death for dishonor, they embraced death for victory. Samurai chose death when honor demanded it. Both paths led to fearlessness, but in profoundly different ways. Think of how this affected combat psychology. A Spartan would fight to the last breath because survival without victory was unthinkable. A samurai would fight with precision and calmness because every strike was a reflection of his soul. One fought as part of a machine, the other fought as a complete individual. And yet, here lies an irony. Spartans, for all their brutality, were not philosophers. They did not write treatises on war. They did not celebrate the artistry of combat. Their focus was survival, discipline, strength. Samurai, by contrast, infused combat with meaning. Every gesture, every motion carried symbolic weight. Their sword was their spirit, their armor their duty, their life their lord's property. Death was not the end. It was fulfillment of a code. Can you imagine what would happen if these worldviews collided? A Spartan, exhausted, still holding the line, chanting with his brothers. A samurai, bleeding but calm, cutting down enemies with fluid strikes, knowing each movement honors his ancestors. It is not simply a fight, it is two philosophies grinding against each other. Who breaks first? Who endures longer? Training also reveals another layer. Spartan boys were deliberately unnerved, so they learned to steal food. If caught, the punishment was not for stealing, but for failing to do it skillfully. This taught resourcefulness through pain. Samurai training, on the other hand, stressed repetition and refinement. Hours spent drawing the bow, polishing technique, meditating on precision. Their strength came not from desperation, but from discipline and mastery. In a drawn-out campaign, which system produces more resilience? The Spartan, hardened by deprivation, may endure physical suffering longer. The samurai, trained to control the mind, may endure psychological pressure with more grace, and both matter in war. Bodies break, but so do minds. Now, let's talk about death. Spartans welcomed it as the ultimate proof of loyalty to Sparta. A glorious death in battle was celebrated, not mourned. Only two kinds of Spartan graves were marked with names, those of men who died in war and those of women who died in childbirth. Everyone else remained anonymous. It was a reminder that identity only mattered if it served the state. Samurai death was more personal, more ritualistic. Seppuku was not about the state, it was about personal honor. To plunge the blade into one's own stomach was an act of reclaiming dignity. Even in defeat, It was brutal, yes, but it gave control back to the warrior, even in dying. The samurai decided his own fate. This contrast speaks volumes. Spartans gave themselves completely to their society, losing individuality. Samurai retained individuality even in service, binding their souls to honor rather than the state, which produces a deadlier warrior. That depends on what you believe creates true strength, the collective or the self, and perhaps. This is why the Spartans and samurai fascinate us even now. They embody extremes we rarely see in the modern world. One reduced humanity to a cog in a military machine. The other elevated war to an art, a philosophy, even a way of beauty. When these two collide in our imagination, it is not just about spears versus swords. It is about two visions of what it means to be human. And maybe that's the deeper reason we keep asking this question. It's not just about who would win a fight. It's about which vision of humanity we think would endure. Now we arrive at the final question, the one that started it all. If Spartans and samurai truly met on the battlefield, who would walk away victorious? By now you've seen that the answer is not simple. Weapons matter. Yes, the Spartan spear against the samurai katana, the Spartan shield wall against the samurai bow, the bronze cuirass against the lacquered lamellar armor. But history is not decided by steel alone. Behind every weapon is a philosophy, a culture, a belief system that shapes how warriors fight and how they die. The Spartans represent them. Extreme of unity, shoulder to shoulder, shield against shield. They were invincible when the line held. Their power came not from individuals, but from the formation itself, from the idea that no man mattered alone. Break one shield, and the others close the gap, break one soldier. And the wall endured. The samurai represent the extreme of individuality within loyalty, each warrior was trained to fight as if the weight of honor rested on his blade. He could act alone, adapt, improvise, and still remain loyal to his lord. His death was not just a loss to the army, it was a statement, a personal declaration of what it meant to live with honor. So, what happens when these two extremes collide on a narrow battlefield? The Spartans might hold the day. Their phalanx was designed to dominate tight spaces, grinding forward until nothing remained. On open ground, the samurai might prevail, with arrows raining from a distance. With fluid movement and sudden strikes, they could exploit the rigidity of the phalanx, cutting down Spartans one by one. But the truth is, wars are never fought on even terms. Terrain, weather, numbers, supply lines, leadership, all of these decide outcomes more than swords and spears. And here's the paradox. Spartans and samurai were never designed to fight each other. They were products of their own worlds, their own enemies. Spartans perfected the art of facing overwhelming numbers with unyielding unity. Samurai perfected the art of personal mastery within the chaos of feudal warfare. To declare one the winner over the other is to ignore the deeper truth that both were already masters in their own arenas. Yet that doesn't stop us from asking. Because the question is bigger than Spartans and samurai. It's about us, the people fascinated enough to imagine this clash. When we debate who would win, we reveal what we value most. Do we admire the Spartan willingness to sacrifice everything for the collective, to become more than individuals? Or do we admire the samurai devotion to personal honor, to skill, to the balance between life and death? Think about it. Which side do you lean toward? Would you rather stand shield to shield, trusting that the man beside you will never break, knowing your fate is tied to his? Or would you rather stand alone with your blade, every strike your own responsibility, your honor carried in each motion, win or lose? And here's the final twist. Maybe the answer is not Spartans versus samurai. Maybe the answer is Spartans and samurai too. Visions of humanity that, when placed side by side, teach us that strength is never one thing. It is not only unity. It is not only individuality. It is the tension between them, the eternal struggle to balance the needs of the group with the soul of the self. That's why this debate endures. Not because we truly expect to know who would win, but because it forces us to ask ourselves, what do we believe makes a warrior truly great? The numbers he commands, or the coat he carries, the shield he holds for his brothers, or the blade he holds for his honor? As you think about this, I leave you with the question not as a historian, not as a storyteller, but as someone fascinated by the same mystery you are if you had to choose. If you had to stand on that battlefield, whose armor would you wear? The heavy bronze of a Spartan, sweating under the sun, shoulder pressed against comrades, your life no longer your own. Or the lacquered plates of a samurai, your blade sharp as your resolve. Every decision yours to bear, your honor tied to each swing, Spartans or samurai. There is no simple answer. There never will be, but maybe that's the point. Because history's greatest debates aren't about finding answers. They're about sparking conversations, keeping alive the memory of those who lived, fought, and died under codes we can barely comprehend today. And so I turn the question to you. Watching now, who do you believe would dominate? Whose way of war do you admire more? Comment your thoughts below. And let the debate continue not just about Spartans and samurai, but about what it means to be human, to fight, to live, and to die with meaning.